Good evening and welcome to the February 18th, 2025 meeting of the Growth Planning Committee. We will start off with introductions of members, and I think we'll start with those that are remote. So Jane.
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Very good. Thanks, Jane.
Jane. Yep.
Liz?
Hi, Liz Johnson.
Excellent. And Tom?
Tom Smith.
Rob Wingle.
Ann Martin.
Dan Saunders?
Galen Webley, support staff.
Nadia Crockett Current, support staff.
Okay. Thank you. So first on the agenda would be approval of the minutes that Liz sent around on, I forget what day it was that you sent them, but any motion to approve as written?
I'll move that we approve as written.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All right, second. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on them? Hearing none, all in favor?
Right.
Approved. Thank you, Liz.
You're welcome.
And next on the agenda will be the handout that we have in front of us, which is titled Findings of Land Use Activities for Special Events Wedding Venues. And so that I will turn over to Galen and Nadia.
Good evening, everyone. So yes, we at the last meeting we discussed a little bit about the land use ordinance changes and some of the submission requirements that we sent over to the town solicitor that were missing from what was originally sent. And so we clarified a lot of that language, but we also discussed some shifts and trends that are occurring in the town of Kennebunkport and in Maine in general. As it relates to special events, you'll be reminded that we had Black Rock Farms that recently went in front of the planning board to have small events on their property. They were controlled by the size, frequency of the events, traffic, and noise concerns with the use of only acoustic-only sound. And so that was approved by the planning board as a restaurant use because that's the closest thing we have in our land use ordinance outside of hotels and inns that would customarily have events of the sort. And so the board at the last meeting asked me to research a little bit of what other towns have for special event venues or the like that we could use as a potential starting point in our discussions for what we'd like to see, if we'd like to explore adding this use into the land use ordinance. And so what you have in front of you, and for those that are virtually, we just sent those to you. We had printed copies here for you, but everyone got this tonight. So that it's the memo that outlines, a little bit about what we're discussing here. And so, going over the first page, what is agritourism? And so, that's a shift that we're seeing in the market where people are paying a lot of money to stay on site and actually work on a farm. That's a thing that happens now. And learn about agricultural practices, picking fruit, vegetables. And it may also deal with other parts of the agricultural operation. So I think that's important for us to understand what that term is. It's probably something we're not customarily aware of, and it's been a recent development trend that's occurred not just domestically but also internationally, where people are going abroad to just learn about where their food comes from. The other one is agri-entertainment. Agri-tainment is what it's called, and so that's a blend of agriculture and entertainment. This is where you have the farmers market that maybe they do hay rides, horse rides, which we've had some operations in town that have gone under those type of uses in the past. But it also expands that a little bit more. It can also expand that to events as well that are not maybe the primary agricultural use, but it's accessory to it. So you're not having just an event venue out in the countryside. It has to be tied to an agricultural operation. I think we need to discuss, what is warranting this discussion, and it's those trends that are occurring in Maine as well as in our town. And so if you go to Tie the Knot, which is a wedding planning website, you can see postings of properties in Kennebunkport that are operating or trying to operate under renting out their properties for wedding events. And so, one of them we dealt with was BlackRock, and, you know, they put parameters on that. But you'll be remiss to remember the Rocking Horse Stables was another one. They still have to go in front of the planning board again to get their approvals. And they're listing it for sale right now. So if there's a new buyer, they're probably gonna have to go through the process again. So instead of the planning board arbitrarily picking these parameters and conditions, which we've enclosed what those conditions were that BlackRock Farms received, it'd be better for us to standardize what the rules are in our various zones for what we'd like to see mitigated, and then what zones we'd like to allow these types of uses, and if there's any other strings attached to it. Keep it uniform, streamlined as a use. So that's what we're here to discuss tonight. In our due diligence and research as staff, we did notice two examples that you can use as a starting point. One was Cape Elizabeth. I think that's the most, it's most similar demographically with being a coastal community, small town, affluent area that sees a lot of visitors in town. And so they take the special events and they call it a special event facility overlay district. I'm not recommending that as but this is what they do as a town. So what they do is they use another overlay district, which is over top of what the regular zoning is, to allow these certain uses in a geographical area. For them, I think it's probably focused more on where the park is in their community. That seems to be where a lot of people, it's iconic pictures you can take there. So they put this overlay district, and within that overlay district, they have performance standards, which you'll see outlined in the memo that's in front of you. The other one that I thought was relevant, and it could be a starting point for the more rural side of Kennebunkport, is Gorham. So the town of Gorham allows for agricultural special event facilities. And so here, what they decided is they're tying it, even though they made it a permitted use, they're tying it to the agricultural operation. So if you have a big piece of land and you just own a big piece of land, and you just decide I want to put a structure in and make it a wedding event venue or a special event venue, you can't do it unless you actually have a working operating farm on site. And how they define it is $10,000 or more of annual gross sales. So that's the two examples that we could find that really give you, you know, some insight on what other towns have done. I'm more than happy to go through those, or if you have questions about them. I know it's a lot to take in. Yes.
I'm familiar with agritourism. I've been in a few places in Europe and participate.
Just make sure we have the microphone for folks that are virtual. Yep.
So I'm familiar with agritourism, been in a few places in Europe, participate in those activities. I can't conceive of agrotainment. I mean, what does that really mean? You go to a farm, how do I get entertained by watching farm workers work? Or pigs doing tricks, or whatever the activity has to be. I can't conceive of agrotainment.
Yeah, so I would think of agri-tainment like, okay, you do a hay rides, right? There's really no educational part into that aspect of it's entertainment. It's something that you're going there to experience.
But it's not connected to the agricultural activity. It's a horse pulling a wagon around the field, and how is that contributing to the farm? Whereas agritourism, you're contributing to the output of the farm and activities, but a horse pulling a hay wagon full of a couple of tourists, what's that do to the farm? How does that really contribute to the farm operations?
So what it helps with the farm operation is it brings supplemental income to the farm operation, that they're able to keep sustainable operations in place, because, you know, labor and everything else has gone up, and so sometimes they need to diversify their income streams coming into the farm in order to keep a viable operation.
Why can't you have the farm workers become jugglers and do activities like that as well? Doesn't involve agriculture, does the horse pull the wagon and all that? I'm still confused. Is this a convenient way to let farms earn income?
Yeah, it's another source of income for the farm.
But it doesn't have the same, I don't know if labor's playing doesn't have the same, I guess, connotation as actually doing work on the farm
Right.
to do farm work.
It's just another, I guess, another metric another aspect they can use.
So you could have a
So
wedding
they could have a
venue,
wedding venue, or they could have the
Ferris
hay rides, they could do a maze,
Okay.
or, that's one way, and then the other way is
Haunted,
sort of holding
Halloween
the
haunted
weddings.
house on a farm.
Yeah.
Like-
Right.
So, Galen, if the root cause that made this, come to light is more wedding venues, right? So you went out and you got some research on other things that are occurring,
Mhm.
but do we have any requests or any trends around the agricultural side of this? Yeah.
So again, you have that latest example with the farm operation that decided they wanted to have these types of events on their property that normally wouldn't be customarily
Right.
thought of as agriculture. So that's
Are you using BlackRock as the?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
so I think we need to think about this, that, with agriculture, agriculture is a big word, and it encompasses a lot of different things. But it's evolved over time. We don't do agriculture the way we've done in the past. And so technology has now allowed for people to shift their operations in other ways that probably weren't thought of in the past. And I think people's perception too of agriculture has changed too. That they want to know where their food comes from. I think that's
Right.
something that's been a trend, that people want to get back to where their roots were. And so a lot of people are now having their weddings in barns, which for me, the economics, I don't understand it, but people pay good money to get married in a barn, and that's something that probably was shunned way back when.
So the model example of Gorham agricultural special events could include weddings.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
And what I would,
So it could be disassociated with agriculture, it's just using the property, got it. Okay.
yeah, and I mean, we've had in the past with Rocking Horse is another example where they did agri-entertainment. They went through site plan review process, and it was supposed to be a horse-related, and they do horse-drawn carriages, carriage rides, and those types of activities. And so they went through the site plan review process. We have something for stables, but let's say they wanted to do hay rides, or they want to do a, something that's
The
Halloween
maze,
focused,
right.
that's not really related, but maybe they're using the barn and using it in that manner to generate income. That's not really the focus of farming, but it was something that's helping them offset their cost. When there's so many other variable costs to running a farm, at least give some steady stream of revenue to help keep those farms in operation. What I can also share with you is during the planning board, when the review was taking place for the special events where they were going to be taking place at Black Rock, neighbors were concerned about seeing that farm go and having that made into a subdivision. Because that's usually what happens with farms, because that's the most viable land where you can actually put septic tanks in.
So giving farm owners an opportunity to generate revenue to maintain their farm
Yeah.
is a motivation here.
So that's the thought process behind the agri-side, agritourism, and we see the shifts that are taking place, where people want to get married in barns, and
Yeah.
so barns are usually customarily found on a farm.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the shift is, and where we see it heading. Whether it's something we should permit in all the zones or limit in certain areas or certain acreage requirements, those are all in here for you guys to discuss.
Do you think, so I completely get it, and the idea of creating some standards that gives the planning board guidelines so they're not random every time someone comes, makes sense. Do you think there's enough consistency in what the uses might be that will be able to create logical standards?
I think there's a pattern that we can go off of, such as number of events, number of attendees. Those are consistent if you look at the different facilities that are in here, the standards that are available, and also with what the performance standards for what the planning board decided during their finding of facts. Traffic concerns, noise concerns, those are all things that they're going to come up in every application.
Right.
I also wanted to caution that even though there's a performance standards list, it doesn't mean that the planning board can't put additional conditions on a certain operation that they are concerned about the close impact that it's going to have to a certain resource or neighborhood. They can certainly put more conditions on if they so choose. And that's what the planning board's there to evaluate. But right now, we have no standards to
Right.
go off of. And so when the planning board was looking at this, they're just saying, okay, well, let's think of this is a concern, ahead of time.
So is the land use ordinance is an ordinance, which is different than guidance, right?
Right.
So, because where my head is going, there are probably certain standards you could create that are relatively consistent as an ordinance, but then after that, you probably get into a lot of areas that guidance is better than a hard and fast rule. Is
So
that-
that's where your conditions would go into. So like, we know that these are gonna be major concerns is the noise, traffic, those. types
What
of-
hours?
Yep.
you know, right.
Hours of operation, acoustic versus, amplified music,
Number of attendees.
number of
parking, yeah.
attendees, headlights, lights in general, where are they gonna go in, use of fireworks, and those things are, they're fairly common.
Yep.
But that's where the conditions come in, is if there's something really specific, because you can't catch everything.
Right, right.
And the planning board's gonna evaluate something and say, okay, what's that negative impact that could potentially be happening? And they might put a condition that's something that we never thought of, and that's what that catch-all is there for.
So I have a question on this. The concept of a wedding venue, that really is a commercial enterprise. So adding that to a residential area, that's now giving a lot, a piece of land, the right to have a commercial use. So how far does that commercial use extend? Will it just be for, as you say, acoustic music? I looked up wedding venues, and some of these are 200 people permitted. Some of the income is $25,000 per event. So you can see, having worked a farm, I understand the need to, bring in as much income as you can. But my concern is that people have purchased in a zone primarily for a surrounding use that is attractive to them. So to have something next door, which I do understand people want to make money and be able to, survive there. But what happens if, I would not want that basically commercial use to go with the land. So now you've created a zone. So if these people sell this property, it's purchased by someone who may be an enterprise that, for example, what is it in Portland, Oxbow Brewing Company has a wedding venue. So what would stop it from coming to a wonderful place like Kennebunkport, purchasing this site and, perhaps its focus is more of a commercial enterprise than the surrounding neighbors were expecting when they moved there. So I have a concern for the people who live next door. So I would want to know if, how many events would be permitted per year. I think that one of the primary concerns that was voiced last week was the noise level. And the noise level, there was recently a wedding in Kennebunkport, and I kept thinking at 9 o'clock it'll end, but no, 11 o'clock it ended, the amplified music. And I thought that was excessive for families that were in that area. So, one of the places that I looked up, and I loved their definition of agritourism, was Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard had a very inclusive, community-oriented style of people enjoying and learning to be in a farm. When we sold our farm, it was really important to us that someone bought it who would use it as a farm, and we were really fortunate that they did. So I would ask, what is it that what would be our definition of agritourism to put to people so they understood what they were voting for? And then also a noise ordinance. I would like to understand the impacts and limitations from a noise ordinance, and how frequent would a commercial gathering be? And then there's an interesting concept out there called farmland registration, which I thought would be something that would be interesting to follow up on and see how that's evolving. But it seems to be that hay rides, corn mazes are really accepted as an agritainment educational activity because you're exploring the farm, you're getting the feel of being with a tractor often. You see what it's like to load up the hay. You get a sense of the corn, and how multiple uses for the corn and the stalks and things like that. So there is an excitement that you're trying to give to younger people to say, okay, yeah, I really want to work very, very hard and have a farm. You want to encourage them to go that way.
Question, are farms in town today considered commercial properties?
So they are permitted as agriculture use, which does say for the commercial raising of livestock or plants. So that's the definition that we have, because you're selling it. It's a commercial activity. It's a lot more permissive than other types of commercial uses. But again, our definition doesn't include these other types of things that.
And part of where my head's going is, I think you said that in Tie the Knot web postings.
Yes.
So there's the Black Rock example, and there are other farms or rural areas in town. But are there also non-farms where a house with a nice vista overlooking the water
Yep.
might be advertised as a wedding venue? So there might be, there's the farm example
Yep.
where we absolutely want to encourage farms to continue to exist and be able to thrive. But we also need to make sure we're addressing the non-farm, non-commercial
Yeah.
use.
I also have a question. I noticed in the goals for the town of Kennebunkport, the protection of farmland from negative impacts of development. One of my concerns is if you have 200 people at a wedding venue, you've got to provide parking for those 200 people. And what is that doing to the landscape of the farm? And I'm just looking at the 2030 goals. And of course, it does say support forestry and agricultural uses and activities such as agritourism, but we just need to be really clear on what the definition of agritourism is, because definitions keep changing all
Yep.
the time.
They do.
Is there, does it make sense for us to get perspective from either people who've already applied for this use or those who might be thinking about it? So,
I don't know what the past practice has been. I mean, I know we've had public workshops before, but
Yeah, we've had public workshops before, a little bit on a larger scale.
For the comprehensive
Covering,
plan.
the whole
Right.
plan, and
Right.
what you want, the visioning, what you want to see the
Right.
town. Not really on something like this,
Right.
doesn't mean we can't.
right,
And certainly, with the pitch, I mean, we're always open to the public to come
Right,
in and talk about a topic that they have an interest in. I mean, those are great points you brought up, and those are all the things that we would have to consider in writing the land use ordinance and what we put in place. You know, maybe it limits it to 4 times a year or whatever, some number, right? I don't know what the right number is, but every weekend's probably not the right number, right? So, and then if you get into, we also have to draw the line between what's private and what's commercial, right? I mean, if you have a nice home and got the yard and you can have 150 people over for your son's or daughter's wedding, good for you, you know, and you should be able to do that.
and we're not suggesting regulating
Yeah.
non-commercial that you're,
Yeah.
Family
But
members
if you
or
have your
whatever.
house and you got that big beautiful thing and then you're asking people to pay you so they can have their son or daughter's wedding then that's not the.
or if you charge your kids
Yeah.
$25,000 to use
Yeah, exactly,
your home.
exactly.
Could I ask that there be language that we discuss that would include anything that adversely impacts adjacent property? I think that would be important for people living next to a potential commercial.
How would you define
Yeah,
that?
That's how we define
Well,
that would
adversely
be important.
impacting for them, it would be noise level,
Could be noise.
it would be traffic, it would be perhaps proximity of different uses to their property. I
It's almost
noticed
like a setback kind of
setback.
idea.
So I think that can be, I do think that can be addressed. I don't like putting subjective language in,
Yeah.
because that's where attorneys get involved and, abutters will hire attorneys for that, to fight it. I think having clear performance standards that aren't being met, is a way of taking, there's a measured approach to addressing some adverse impacts. As we discussed earlier, your land use ordinance does have a section on noise for the town. And so there are certain decibel levels that are allowed during normal day hours from 7 to 7, and then after 10 p.m. to,
I think it's 7 to
is
7.
7? Did I get it right?
Isn't there a second that goes to
7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and then from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. There's 2 different decibel levels that you have. And of course, at night, at that 7 p.m., it goes down. And that's from the property line where those decibel levels are read. So we do have clear standards in town for all kinds of just activity that takes place. And certainly, I think we need to be cognizant of that there's a measured approach to determining what is an adverse impact on a neighbor. So yes, I think there needs to be a lot of discussion about this on where we want it placed. Some places it should not be permitted. I mean, it's just too close for growth wise with other neighbors or other residential uses. But there's other areas in town that are traditional areas, and I could see that being a compatible thing where it's more commercial in nature and always been customarily having these types of events, especially when they were linked to hotels and inns and restaurants in the past. So I want to make sure that we're doing this in a balanced way, that yes, we need to be concerned about the impact of the neighbors, but we don't want to hinder people's ability to do some sort of activity on their property to keep the sustainability of farms. And that's one thing that I just think of just off the top of my head. But yes, private businesses that if it's in the rural area that they're not related to agriculture at all, they just want to have it in a subdivision, I would be concerned with that, just with how close it is to other people.
If the concept that if it's your own property and you're doing an event for your own family,
You can do that.
I think we all agree with that.
Yep.
Does that also carry over to if you're a renter? You're renting for a week at Goose Rocks Beach and you decide to have an event? Does it carry over?
That's a good question.
That is an interesting question, because again, I don't know if we really regulate that to this extent right now. Certainly, it could be argued that if they have a short-term rental license, they are
Resident for
they're
that period.
regulated, they're regulated at some point, which they have good neighbor standards that they have to abide by on top of that. But it's a good question, like how do we address those types of gray areas in our ordinance?
Does that question imply that the standards for a business type operation, commercial, be different from the family having, let's say, a wedding? Because so would the family be restricted, because it's not licensed as a commercial entity, restricted on the noise level and the traffic and the parking and all the rest of the stuff, whereas a business would have more leniency, could do more.
So,
That doesn't seem right to me that would be the case.
It's the other way around, I think.
The neighbors are still gonna be just as hurt by the private wedding as they are by the public wedding.
it's no different than you having a birthday party on your property. And there are people that they get really animated during their birthday parties, right? And they go past 10 o'clock. And that's why we have our general noise standards that will kick in at that point to regulate that activity and control it.
But my point was, I don't think that the license for a commercial entity, be it a wedding or whatever it's gonna be, should have any different standards, any different thresholds, levels than private houses.
All right, we almost saying.
I don't think
the opposite.
anyone's suggesting that.
The private house actually has more latitude without having to get a license, whereas a business would have to get.
They have so
A
many they
permit.
can probably
But
do,
the
and,
same constraints apply to both of them.
right.
Same both of them.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we're more lenient
Right,
than,
Yeah, or more constraints on.
The business
Right.
use.
Right. I don't see, this would always be a conditional use.
Right.
Wherever we put it.
Yeah, I don't see it
Right,
being
so
a
that
permitted.
They would have to go forward and get those additional conditions based on the uniqueness of their location and so forth.
and the butters would be notified.
And the,
So
but,
it's-
yeah, absolutely.
Is there
I'm
anything-
jumping to a fine detail, but I know the Cape Elizabeth, the idea of an overlay was not necessarily one that you support, but it does say, one thing I pointed out is, or I see is this, they do have a minimum lot area of 15 acres.
Mhm.
So just even starting with some kind of foundational minimum size of a property that then is associated with the number of guests that would be permitted. It feels like one place to start.
Yeah, I think Liz brought that up at the last meeting too, about a certain
Okay.
acreage requirement.
Yeah.
Liz and Jane, did you have anything to add?
Yeah. We're discussion. Are we try to look at it down to the more specifics later? Aren't we really only talking about farms or businesses that are already commercial being able to offer their location for some sort of event, whether it was an educational day camp thing, you know, hay rides, etc., or a wedding party event? If so, how many of those existing farms are we actually talking about in Kennebunkport? And what other commercial entities could be considered a quote unquote farm right now in Kennebunkport? Because in other words, if there's just a house, I'm thinking of a house right now where my friend used to live out just past Rocking Horse Stable. I think it was actually on Goose Rocks Road. It was a farm before she lived in it. She no longer lives in it, but way back when it was a farm, it was a working farm, and they debated offering that as a party venue because it had a beautiful barn, has a beautiful barn. But like what we're saying right now is that type of residential place could not do commercial events. So how many working farms are we actually talking about?
So that's a great question. I have to pull those numbers for you. What I can say from a planner's perspective, I'm not looking at this from a what's now. I'm also looking what's in the future. And so my mindset's going to be a little bit different than maybe yours will be, Liz, on this, in that while there were farms that maybe went out of operation, why did those farms go out of operation? Is it because they weren't financially sustainable? And if they had the ability to maybe do some other revenue sources, could it be something sustainable? Is it something that, you know, maybe some younger people are going to eventually buy that land and then decide, hey, I want to do a farmer's market, a hay rides, and all these other agri-tainment type things as part of my business operation to pay back my USDA loan? And that's future proofing. I don't, you know, we can talk about, you know, the current, but I think we need to look at the land that's currently available in town, and I think there is potential that people might want to get back
Yeah.
into having.
Well, then
Food's
we
closer
have to
source.
look at zoning. Like right now, they could only do that in the free enterprise zone, right?
For which,
To create any income producing commercial entity.
yeah, your free
Let's
enterprise
say
zone is
they
pretty
let's say they bought the house that I'm talking about and turned it into a working farm again, and or an event thing. But could they? Because if it's not in free enterprise.
again, yeah, if how we had to do it with BlackRock is we had to do it as a restaurant use that's non-structural, because that's the closest we could get in the free enterprise zone to allowing that use.
They're in free enterprise.
Yes,
BlackRock is.
BlackRock's in free enterprise.
What if someone's not? Would they be allowed to do this?
That's where it depends on the zone, and I would argue, especially in your rural area, if it was a farm that was located in your farm and forestry zone, they probably wouldn't be able to do this right now.
I have a question. Are we talking exclusively about trying to write language for farms? Or are we, you're back to the, what if someone just advertised, I have a nice property with a view of the ocean, I want to hold a wedding? So,
It's a larger conversation that,
right.
you know.
Because I think and maybe these are the wrong categories, and I don't know enough about all the various zones, but it does feel like there's probably a lane that's about farms, working farms that are commercial and where there is a motivation to make sure that they're sustained. There's probably some category that's some large non-farm properties that would also be pretty attractive for weddings and other kind of events. And then there's probably something that's a more just residence that, I don't know if those are the right 3 lanes, but I think there are.
I think
We
so.
need-
I think the one overarching lane I think I see in there, it's more of an accessory use
Right,
to what the
right.
primary use of the property
Right,
is.
right.
Right, so it's
Yep.
not, I'm gonna buy the 15 acres and I'm gonna hold weddings here every week.
Right.
Right, it's, it may be, oh, if with this, if I can do this 5 times a year or 6 times a year, in addition to, you know, restarting the farm, maybe that's gonna work, and that would probably be good for the town, that we have another farm in town that we can get local produce from, right? And then maybe some of the current businesses that are in the hospitality, this might be an opportunity for them to gain some additional income a couple times a year.
Yep.
You brought up a concern that I hadn't thought of, and that is, you know, I have a beautiful home, I rent it every week during the summer. I could certainly have my family up for a wedding. Can each one of these people I rent it to have a wedding? So basically, you're renting your home for a wedding.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
that's
Most
that's a
people
good
get
one we
married
have to
in the
think
house.
about. right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's always the unintended consequences. Right. That's the biggest thing that we have to deal with on here is, we're trying to come up with something that's a great idea, what's the unintended consequence, and how do we prevent that? Because there's really good developers and smart people out there who use that to their advantage. right?
And I think.
Yeah, there's just a lot of different, potential things that we've brought up and that sort of could be.
Yeah.
I think we've all agreed that like the individual homeowner can host their kid's wedding. That, we don't need to talk about that anymore, but as a I think
Lost you a little, Liz.
what's that?
We lost, at least I thought we lost you there for a minute.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, we had you right up through, you know, that people could use their own homes for a wedding, but we didn't really hear anything much after that.
Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you now.
The rental home or, I mean, we own a home.
Yeah, sorry,
that-
Liz, we're losing you. We're hearing
Oh.
about every other word at best.
No,
I heard you comment on the rental properties, the short-term rental.
to make sure that specify.
Yeah, I think we would have to. Well, I mean, there's
Most
a couple
people
different ways we could go. We could be very
want to,
specific and have it all be about agriculture as a start.
yeah, and then
right? And then move on from there for additional. Right? Or existing commercial properties that are in the hospitality business,
right.
right, that could have.
Want me to throw another wrench into this whole thing?
Yeah, sure.
So, you know, with as we talked about agritourism, the other conversation that I'm thinking about is, you know, people that stay on the farm as part of that experience. And is that short-term rental license? They need to have a short-term rental license, or is that something that we're going to be allowing people to do as a way to get them on the property?
Wouldn't that be agritourism?
It is, but
But
right
it's a
now
different use. It's like an
under the
Airbnb or,
Yeah.
under the land use ordinance, under the short-term rental ordinance for the town of Kennebunkport, any dwelling has to have a short-term rental license outside of Goose Rock's Beach, and there's a cap, a limited number that you can have. And so there's a wait list. And so the question is that something that
Is there a definition of a farm? I know that you've mentioned, 15 acres, but does the town of Kennebunkport have an understanding that this residence would qualify as a farm? I understand that there's the standard of growing something and having a certain income from that.
Right.
But I'm just wondering if that's an overlay consideration or an acceptance of that this property in its current use qualifies as a farm, and as such, an Airbnb activity in terms of living on a farm and working on the farm for a week or 2 weeks, or learning husbandry or whatever it is, that is all integral and accepted and approved within that use on that lot, on that piece of property. My concern is that we had I've come from a place where we had a battle over agritourism, and one of the things is that the definitions just have to be so clear as to what is permitted and what is not permitted, because fear comes into it, and it's and I really do want to honor people who live next door, who have purchased with a dream in mind. That their concerns, at least that they can speak to them, that they can know what they're voting for.
So to answer your question, we do not have a definition for farm. We do have a definition for agriculture. And so that's, I think, the state definition, which is the cultivation of soil and the production or raising of food, crops, and other valuable or useful products, including commercial gardening, and the growing of nursery stock. Agriculture does not include forest management and timber harvesting activities.
Yeah.
So that's the only definition we have.
Isn't that the state?
Yes, that's the states. Yep.
Yeah, so we could
Which we
come
would
up
need.
with the definition.
Yeah.
We could,
Well,
Which you see it in here, like, I think one of the towns had you had to have 10,000, I think it was 10,000,
Annually.
gross annual sales as part of that operation.
That's Gorham, I think.
It's Gorham.
Does that
So-
include the renting of
under-
the venue?
Yeah.
Because that's, you're in with one
we
event.
cover that in a weekend.
Exactly.
I think the main statutes have a farming or ranching definition under their agritourism activities. That might be a starting point for a conversation.
And whether or not they would need to, if we allowed something like that, would they also have to get a short-term rental permit? Right, that discussion.
The thing is that short-term rental, farming is year-round in effect.
Right,
For people to stay.
but it's people that stays.
Yeah.
Well, you
short-term
wouldn't
rental.
want
I mean,
to if they had that.
how would can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
How would, let's say, a farm turned into a agro tourism thing with places for people to spend the night and learn about it and whatever? How is that any different from Hidden Pond, ecotourism, which is in the hotel category? They don't need a rental permit. It's no different.
Well, hotels and motels are exempt from the STR licensing requirements.
Well, what category does Hidden Pond sit in? Because that's ecotourism.
It's a resort wedding
Yeah,
venue.
I
is how they-
believe that was, I think that was, if memory serves me, I believe that was regulated as the hotel motel hospitality type use in the town ordinances. I was not here for that, but I believe that's what they fell under,
That would be logical.
as a commercial, a commercial subdivision, like a commercial condo type deal, is my
Right, so
understanding.
I
Yeah.
mean, believe me, I'm not supporting of that, but, what's to stop someone from buying 40 acres and starting up a farm and having animals as a petting zoo type of thing, and people can sleep there and experience the agro-tourism thing? What's the difference?
Is a ongoing business use different than what
Yeah.
we're talking about, which is specific conditioned events, right?
Yeah, I think the piece that we have to keep on is that the main use, the primary use of the property is a farm. and that these special events, with the word special being, they're unique and they're occasional. That's some frequency that's, probably not more than 10 times a year, probably something less. So, even the agritourism where you have people come and stay, we would have to have some type of definition on how often that could occur.
So it's an accessory.
I'm just playing devil's
Yeah, no, for
advocate
sure. I mean, that's what we gotta
here
do here.
of,
We have
yeah.
to do that, so.
I don't know if it's still for sale, but there used to be like 40-something acres off of, I can't, between, like up. And I wanted to buy that.
Sorry, Liz, I don't know,
And-
we lost you again. But
Hey,
we heard about 40 acres somewhere,
Yeah,
I'm
so-
assuming in rural area?
yep,
Okay.
just use it as,
Yeah, the expectation, at least I think, would be that it is gonna be a farm, and maybe they can use these events to help supplement,
I mean, if,
right?
well, but,
Accessory.
again, I want to buy, have people out. That's any different. KR,
Right. Yeah, sorry, Liz,
But
we
year-round-
really didn't catch that, but I think I got your gist, is, how is it different than
hidden,
other types of, activities that have gone on at the motel, hotel type locations?
I know we're doing somewhat hypotheticals
Yeah.
to understand what the future could hold.
Right.
right,
I'm not sure if someone did buy 40 acres for a purpose that actually adds something to the town and prevents it from becoming another development, that's a bad thing.
Right.
But there should be guidelines, for
sure.
sure. Are we, so your idea, Dan, do we start with just defining it for farms and build from there is interesting. I'm sure there are lots of unintended consequences, but I'm not sure it should be limited to just farms. I think guidance around non-farms or ordinance around non-farm with, and maybe that's where the minimum acreage becomes a critical performance standard as well as other things. But I don't know how pervasive this is, but I could see plenty of pieces of property that are not farms where it's not unreasonable to request a limited use outside of the norm, as long as we put the right limits.
And then the hard thing will be, I think, it will be like you mentioned, the parking.
Correct.
Right, I mean, I think BlackRock is making it work because they're working with
They're shuttling people.
another hospitality group, and they're shuttling the people there. So it works in that way, so you just have a bus running back and forth, instead of having 40, 50 cars parked on the streets or on the property should be a farm, and now it's a parking lot, right?
Which I think in general, that's where,
And that's gonna be a challenge for
Put-
any of them.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Putting a parking condition on anything is a way to control for that and force, some kind of shuttle bus.
Yeah, but there's no parking really in town, so they have to tie in with the hospitality group.
I mention it because I was looking at the plan for Kennebunkport going up through 2030, and part of it is to be protective to land.
Yes.
And so my idea of something, a venue was 200 as a possibility. You know, we have really narrow roads here, so it's really gonna be parking on the land, and now you've got a flat surface, and you've gotta remove things in order to accommodate that parking, and that didn't seem to go with what people had said they wanted to see in the future. So I have to, obviously, we give respect to what the voters have said so far.
Sure.
Yeah, I would just consider too, I think that incidental is that key word. When we think of agritourism, in that, I grew up in agricultural community, and so I'm quite familiar with it. It wasn't uncommon to go into a former hayfield or just a grassy field, and you would park your car to go pick apples and do those types of things, and then it was incidental. It wasn't something that you're doing on a regular basis. It's during a certain season or a certain time period. Certainly, the farmer doesn't want to destroy its number one resource. They are very good stewards of the land. A lot of them have conservation plans in place, to address erosion sediment control concerns. And so I think, farmers are good caretakers. I think they're very cognizant of making sure that they're not going to damage their land. They don't want to deal with ruts and everything else either. So I think there's that incidental aspect. I think that covers us to make sure it's not every weekend or every week that they are doing something on the land.
I guess one of the concerns I have is I agree with you that the farmers love the land.
Yeah.
And, but I think that one of the concerns I have is if this is a property that's sold, and then now it has an additional value when it sells because has a partial commercial operation, it brings in income. Now the next owner may not be a farmer, but would recognize the value to this land use.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know what they're, I would love to see some parameters in there to guide them to protect the land, to assist in some way.
I think, I could be wrong, there might be a property for sale right now. It's advertising that it's got the potential to be a venue. Am I
Yes.
mistaken?
Rocking Horse
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other guidance you'd like to give us? It sounds like, from what I'm hearing tonight, that we should keep it focused on agriculture. I think that's the consensus I hear from the room.
I'm supportive of that.
Do you mean permit events
Yeah,
on
I think if-
agriculture for the purpose of this discussion? Or allowing only events on agricultural properties?
It sounds like, from what I'm hearing tonight, is it has to be tied to agriculture is the concern of let's test the waters with a small step instead of opening it up to non-agricultural lands that may just want to rent their properties for wedding venues to supplement their property taxes, heating bill, whatever it is.
Well, I don't think that should even be allowed,
Isn't
period.
Is that addressed now to some extent
For
the short-term rentals? Are issues already addressed there?
So again, if someone has a commercial use that's being used on a regular basis, and they're advertising it as their commercial wedding event venues, we would say you need to go and fall under restaurant, hotel, one of those uses. You can't just be a single-family dwelling and decide I want to have a wedding event venue. You can do it for your family, but not for just the general public.
Is that stated somewhere today, or is that just the general
That's been
practice?
our policy in the past. Because when we look at land use as planners, we have to say, okay, what use are they following under? And this is the use that we found in your land use ordinance, that's the closest that we can find to it. So if they're in a zone that's not permitted, then it's a non-starter, you can't do it. If they are in a zone that's permitted for, let's say, the restaurant use, they'd have to go in front of the planning board and go through the site plan review process. And then abutters are notified, and then that's when the conditions get placed before they approve it or they deny it, depending on how they go.
So, just try to clarify.
Yeah.
So, you use the word advertised as an event, but if I
Yes.
privately said to one of my neighbors, I'll rent you my house to do a wedding for your kid.
If we don't have any evidence of you commercially renting it, how can we enforce
Right.
that?
Right. So,
But
Why not?
most cases, what people like to do is they like to come to the town hall and like to get a liquor license to
Right.
have a special event on the property.
okay, well,
And
all
we
right, so
say,
there's, all right,
what are you
there's-
doing? And then that opens up a whole other conversation where
Right.
that gets,
got it, okay.
caterers get
So
caught.
there are, that's an interesting,
Yes.
so there, even if it isn't specific for that purpose, there are other parameters that might limit it.
Yes.
Got it.
But that's, again, we have this gray area where
Right.
I didn't like with doing it with Black Rock, like the restaurant side of use, it just,
Doesn't really-
it's
It's
the
not-
closest I have, but it's really stretching it. It's not.
Right.
It's not great. I'd rather us actually contain it and, okay, if you're now trying to do something, you don't meet the criteria of being on an agricultural operation, this is a no-go. Like, we have a clear use now that's allowed. You can't go under this other umbrella. The voters have made it clear they want it really focused on a certain type of use. Right now, I don't have it.
So
So we have to
the,
use the best alternative, and that's, especially in the free enterprise zone, there's a lot of uses allowed in that zone.
so the Cape Elizabeth example has nothing to do with agriculture. It is literally just a
Correct.
special event
Yep.
guideline or ordinance.
I mean, they still have some good things in there, I think. that
Absolutely,
are-
yeah.
Yeah.
Are the various regions, dumb question, the various regions in town, what I'll call homogeneous, where the ordinances, the practices, the definitions are all the same within a specific area? So if you live in a place and you're surrounded by commercial activities and you're not, why can't you just automatically get a commercial license if everybody around you is commercial? If the whole area were zoned as commercial or non-commercial, that would make sense, you have to go get the exception rather than being the rule. Do you follow what I mean?
So if I'm following you, you know, you're focused on if it's a zone-specific area, and it's been customarily, historically, let's say hospitality-related, or Dock Square area, that area is hospitality-focused related, that if you have a single family, that you should be able to make that commercial, is
I'm
that?
asking that question.
Yeah.
But then, if not, why not?
So again, we would, under our land use ordinance, we would have to follow one of the uses. And so if they could say, I'm putting in my single family, I'm making it now a restaurant, and I want to host weddings and things, besides maybe doing some tastings for other things, they'd go through the planning board process, and that would still occur. But if you having a single family out in a place where customarily wasn't associated with commercial activity, we wouldn't allow you just to do that, especially if we have a defined use that curtails this type of activity to really be a sustainable funding stream for an agricultural operation. Like, that's really the intent behind it.
But in general, all the zones, they'll have the list of permitted uses that you're allowed to do, and then conditional uses that you can do and you have to go and get approval for.
So within the zone, it's consistent, zone to zone, they may be different.
To be honest, those uses and conditional uses, for the most part, have been there for many, many years. There's some minor changes that have occurred over time. But that's what you have to rely on, and if it's not a permitted use or not a conditional use, you can't do it there.
And going back to your example, if I were the person buying a single-family home surrounded by, you know, restaurants and bars and so forth and so on, I'd be hard-pressed to accept a decision that says you can't do it. You can't make your house into a bar if I'm surrounded by bars.
It's not likely the case here,
Yeah.
but that, if it's
It could-
not, if it's still not permitted or conditional,
You'd have
those other
to
ones
get
could
a,
have been grandfathered,
Yeah.
and they're allowed to stay in that, and if they go on and sell that, and someone turns that into a residential, they turn the bar into a residential use, I think after a year, they've lost that grandfathering clause. If they said, oh boy, this residential thing's not working out, I was making more money as a bar, I wanna go back, but it's past a year, they would be able to change it.
Residents are given 5 years, apparently.
they?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You get 18 months for grandfathered status for any other uses.
Okay.
So if it's a non-conforming use, you're allowed to continue it, but if you discontinue it, you have 18 months. Like, let's say you demo the structure and you want to rebuild it. You have 18 months to rebuild and use that use again, or else you lose your
So
non-conforming.
as a novice, I didn't realize it. You said these are already codified, so there should be no surprises.
Yeah, it shouldn't be any surprises, really shouldn't be any surprises.
And what's shocking is that, Dan made a good point, the town of Kennebunkport has not changed its free enterprise zone. The uses that are in there are all the same uses that were back there 30-plus years ago. It's amazing to me, as a planner, that we haven't changed that much with our land use policies. I think it's time to take a fresh look at it and say, this is some new things that have happened in the industries that we need to now address. I mean, land use ordinances are not meant to be stagnant documents. They are living, breathing documents that change with the community's vision for what they see, especially in certain zones in their community. So,
Yeah, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you. Have you noticed, you asked where should it be?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, there's been so much change over the past 10 years. Are we talking about the same thing and what's going on?
Probably not, right?
mhm.
When I joined the board in 2006, the 2005 plan was voted down by the townspeople. And there were certain things that were suggested to change that were not taken. And one of them was the zones. So we said, okay, we're not gonna mess with the zones, we'll leave the zones as they are. And we worked through getting a comp plan chapter by chapter to give everybody little bits at a time to 2012, right? And then we updated it, and we really didn't change the zones that much either. But, it's an opportunity now. I think we've done a lot better job in educating, I think, the town over the last 20 years, so that they understand this, and so, it could be an opportunity that we take a look and see, should we change some of these uses? Right, and add some uses and remove some uses.
Oh, wait, did I say 30 years? It's since the
Could be 40 years.
1970s.
Could be
Those
40
uses have
50
been there.
years. But the goal was to get a
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so we achieved that. And it's helpful. When you have a comp plan, then you can, and your land uses are consistent with your comp plan, they have more validity in the courts,
Yeah,
Yeah.
So, not that means you're gonna win, you might lose your lawsuit, but at least there's more validity. Okay. So, what should be our homework for, review this, think about how we want to address it? Do we want to keep it just focused at the moment on agriculture, or should we broaden it?
If there's other research of other states or other areas that you'd like to research, I'd suggest that too. That way we come in with a perspective of what each of us are thinking about for this town, if these uses are warranted. Maybe they're not warranted, but we need to have a conversation about them, and see if this is a good fit in certain, I would also say, think about, if you do think that this is something that should be allowed in the town, what zones would you be comfortable with? That's what I would really like to push for, to get some feedback on. Certainly, I don't see these as permitted in anywhere. I would think it'd be a conditional use. I think that's something that, there's a lot of concern with what's the impact on the surrounding neighborhood and the community. But what zones, when you look at the map, make sense to you when evaluating this type new use? That's something that would be helpful for homework-wise.
Okay. So, there was nothing
Gonna
else
run
on
him
the
by a
agenda,
farm.
right?
What?
There's nothing else on the agenda?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Is there any other business that members want to bring up? Okay. So, next meeting. I think we say we're sticking with the first and third,
First and third, so that'd be March 4th.
March 4th. So I'm traveling that week, but I'll be on Eastern Time Zone, so I should be able to join remote.
As long as we hear you.
Yeah, unless you hear me.
We might ask you to
Yeah.
repeat yourself.
That's okay.
March 4th and March 18th.
Yep.
Yeah. Does that work for everybody?
Are we doing the game on March 4th?
So the
That's
reason
right.
you didn't have the game tonight is I did not have, my pieces got stuck in customs. And so we're
Customs.
waiting for them to get here, and we already received one package, so we're waiting for a few more. But then once we have all the pieces, then you will get to play, I promise. It might be your next meeting,
Legos
we'll
got
see.
caught in
Huh?
customs. Legos were caught in customs.
Yes. Remember that one day where USPS decided to stop all shipments from China?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that impacted the town of Kennebunkport.
It's because
No.
Galen
It was like the day
didn't buy the
after.
Lego brand. He had to,
It was like one
He had
day.
to buy
and
a knockoff.
They were not like.
Okay.
His budget didn't permit Legos.
Yes, that's what I get.
Okay.
So yes, hopefully, you know, if we don't, at the next meeting, if you're not here, Dan, we'll probably have to do that on the 18th then.
Okay.
But my hope is we get this started, because I do want to beta test the game before we open it up to the public. So you guys will test this out to see if this works, if there's things we need to tweak before we go live, so.
Wow.
Good. All right,
That's it.
I'll take a motion.
Motion to adjourn?
All right, seconded?
Second?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Lots of research there, speaking of doing your
Yeah.
homework.